Ba, 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 ba. Do, 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 do. Hey, kia ora. Helen Brahms here, coming to you live from Sun City in Arizona. Hope you've all had a super fantastic, sparkling second day of January. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1251. Yes, we got a 1 on there. I actually kind of thought it was kind of cool that the first day of the new year was a 0, was 1250. I thought that was kind of cool. But anyway, so here we are. I hope your second day of the brand new year is going off well. I was thinking as I was out walking Zephyr, we just got back from our walk. What sort of things could, as a genealogist, what are some of the things that you need to be aware of? Or, what's some quick tips and tricks that you could do? I've got weird messages coming up on my screen on my phone, and I don't know why. I'm going to work that out later. Right now, I'm here with you. All right. What are we talking about? Oh, yeah. So I thought tonight's topic, was what lists do you need for genealogy? And because some people go, well, where do I look for this or where do I look for that? So what you do is that when you're looking for a particular person, you have to know, what do you know about them? Whenever you start looking in genealogy, it is what do you already know? Do you happen to have a copy of a birth certificate in your hand and you want to find out who is this person? And it's got the parents' names on there. Those birth certificates are wonderful like that. They put the parents' names on there, if known. But you have to be aware that in some countries, if the mother and the father are not married, they only put the mother's name on the birth record. They will not put the father's name on the birth record to indicate that she was not married at the time the child was born. I know that sounds a little backwards and little things, but then there are other things that you can look at on the birth registration is who reported the birth. Could it possibly be that the birth father was the one that reported the birth? But these are just questions that'll come up, who are the parents? So we always start with what we know. What information do you already have on hand about this person that you want to look at? Then if you know their birth date and their death date, you're looking at a time span. So here's when they were born, here's where they died, and there's all this stuff that happened between these two dates. So what possible things could we, I'm just adding to my list as I go along as I think of things. Oh my gosh. So what possible things could we find that relate to this one person that happened in the dash? Because if you remember, if you look at cemetery records, it will have a birth year. It may even have the date, hyphen, and then the death date or death year. And what did they do with the dash? And that's always interesting. It's always an interesting question to ask. So what did they do with the dash? So you have the range of which you are looking. So when you look at this range, it's like, okay, if you are in the UK, you had a census every 10 years that ended in a 1. If you're in the US or Canada, you had a census every 10 years that ended in a 0. And then if you're in some states, they did ones on the years of 5s. So like if you were in New York State, they did census on they did the federal census on the years that ended in 0. They did a state census on the years that ended in 5. So based on where this person was located, what census records could they possibly appear in? So you're going to be making your own little checklist. And each person's one will be slightly different. They'll basically be the same information: birth, place and when, baptism, place and when, everything's when and where. So, you want birth records, you want baptismal records, you want marriage records, and these are just your basic ones. You want death records, you want cemetery records if they've been buried. Even some cemeteries will have records of cremations. You will also want to know census records. Where were they? Did they move around? Did they stay in the same place? Are they listed in a city directory? Was there a city directory available at the time? Are they listed on a voter's registration? Were they eligible to vote at the time? Are they listed? Are they listed on any military? Oh, that's another good one I got to write down. Any military records? Did they serve in the military? They may not have served in the military, but did they have a draft card? Because there were times when, especially here in the States during World War I and World War II, they did a draft. And you still had to register, and based on your age as to which date you registered and which list you were put on. There's also land records. Did they own any land? Did they have a deed to a house? Did they have a probate? So there's also probate records you got to check out as well. Oh my gosh, because probate records will contain things like wills and testaments. They will contain things like inventory. What property did they own at the time? Who did they leave everything to? They will have testimonies from other people who knew the person who has passed. And if there wasn't a will, may have known what they wanted, because, the courts have to do something with this probate. Who are they? Who is the executor? Who is appointed by the person who passed to be the executor of their will? Or does it have to be somebody who was appointed by the court because the person didn't have a will or didn't name anybody as the executor, or the executor is no longer with us? So there's all these questions going around on on things. But if you have a checklist that you can go through and go, yep, birth certificates, yes, got that. Found them in a parish record. The other thing that you have to know too is based on when they were born and when they passed, did the state, the country, or the parish, state, country, county, parish, country, state, county, parish, township, city, when did they require you to officially start recording births, deaths, and marriages? Because they all started at different dates. Each state, city, parish all had different dates based on where you were. So this is where you go to somewhere like familysearch.org, and under search, they have a thing that's called Research Wiki. And you go into Research Wiki and you type in there the state, the country, whatever it is that you're looking for. And they have information there. They have information there with history of the area. So you get to know some of the things that were going on in the area that your ancestors may have been involved with. And it will tell you, what were the biggest industries in that area at certain times. Were you a coal mining town? Were you a lumber town? Lumber, wood. A milling town. Did you, were you a wheat town, converting wheat into flour? Was a lot of cotton grown in the area? All sorts of things. Were you farmers on agriculture, or were you farmers on horticulture? And all this sort of stuff. We'll have all this information in there. Plus, it also tells you all the records that are available for that particular area. And it will say, this is statewide. These ones are county-wide. These ones are parish-wide. These ones are kept in the towns. So it will tell you what years that if a birth took place between this year and this year, it will be located in these records, and this is where you find them. Some of them are online, some of them are not. So some of them you're going to have to be boots on the ground in person looking at the records. Other ones are available online, and it could be images only, which takes a little more time, but there is a way to get through images, and we will talk about that in another session. The other thing that you can look at too is that when you're looking at census reports and you find children, now start looking for the birth records of the children, because the children will have their parents' names listed on their birth records. Also look for marriage records for the children, because on the marriage records, it will most of them have at least the father and what their occupation was. Some will also include the mother and her maiden name being the name that she was born with, not her married name. When you're recording females onto any genealogy records, always record their birth name, not the name that they got married. If they got married 3, 4, 5, 6 times, you want their birth name. And it can get a little tricky finding females, but we'll talk about that in another session. We're talking about the list today, preparing your list to answer your questions. What records can you look at that will answer your questions? So you may have a question about, did my great-great-grandfather, did my paternal great-great-grandfather, fill in the name, born between this year and this year, serve in the military? That's a question we go for. Okay, so now what do we need to look at? Based on the time you're looking at, you still want to verify that you've got the right person. So you're going to be looking for birth records, census reports, all of those sorts of things. But you're also going to include military records to see if there's any military records as well. And there's different sites you can go to. Newspaper. Oh my gosh, newspapers are awesome. I love scouring newspapers. And when I go in and I'm looking for a particular name in the newspapers, yes, it may come up. And if it's the person I'm looking for, like if it's their obituary, because sometimes that's the only place I find a death record is their obituary. Because for whatever reason, I can't get access to the state record or the county records or whatever. It could be a time frame thing, because if they were born between a lot of places have rules that if they were born before this year, you cannot look at their birth certificate unless you are directly related to that person, and you have to provide all that documentation to them, and then they send you a copy of the certificate. It could be that if they were married after this date, you can't have access for the same reason. We want them to be alive. They could be living people. They don't want to give out records to living people unless you are directly related to them. The same with death records. They don't want to be giving those out either. So there's all sorts of different places. And even when you're looking at death records, you also want to look, if you're in the States, at the Social Security numbers. The Social Security has a claims and what's another word? Claims and oh shoot, I can't remember. Oh, what's that thing? But I would tell you, the records on that particular one are more because they will have the person's name as it's changed throughout the years. So if you've got somebody with a married name, it will with a maiden name, a female, you can follow who they got married to over time because their name will change. It's oh jeepers, I'm gonna have to go look. I'm sorry, I am usually way more. They've got the death index for the Social Security one, but the one that I like the most, if it is available because of the timing, is the Social Security Applications and Claims Index. And the Social Security Application and Claims Index has a lot more information on it than the Death Index does. The Death Index just includes when they were issued with their Social Security number and their name and the day they died. And that's basically it. It's very basic. But if you get to the applications and the claims, it could have on there their birth date and place, their death date and place. It could have their parents' names in there, their spouses' names. If they are, and all of, whether it's the Social Security Death Index or the Social Security Applications and Claims, they will all have the person's Social Security number on there. But the applications and claims, if it is for a female, it will show their married names. So you may end up with one person and you may think they've only been married once, and you go into this record and find they actually got married 3 times. And then that's sort of like, oh, now is this really the same person? The other thing that I do when I'm working with lists is I create an Excel spreadsheet. Across the down the side, I have the different records I'm going to be researching. Yes, this is all part of my new process that I've started implementing in 2020, is putting down the side all of the places I'm going to be researching to answer that question. And then across the top, I'm going to have people's names, because I may come across people who have the same name as the person I'm looking for, but may not necessarily be the same person. You could be in an area, you've got 2 people with the same name. And you're like, which is the one that I want? So you need to put these records side by side so you can actually look at them. Are they the same record? Are they not? And this is what I had to do for a client for her maternal grandfather, and maternal grandfather, because it was a very interesting case where, we found the person, we found the birth record, here's the parents' names, and we're going along and we're following this all the way through. And we knew that he got married between a census record, but by the time the next 10-year census record came around, he was no longer married. Or he may have still had dependents, I think it was. So they weren't living together. Him and his wife were not living together, and they had a child. But then I found an obituary report for the mother. So for the great-grandmother. And I looked at the great-grandmother's thing, and it had this other person's name there as the wife. And I'm like, he must have got remarried again. But when I went and checked the marriage certificate for the couple named in the obituary, they had a different father's name. And I'm like, So then I had to go, and I did create the little chart I started creating this chart so I could put side-by-side comparison, because I found out that within a short window, I'm trying to remember how many weeks it was. I want to say 3 or 4 weeks. But within a short amount of window, there was 2 women with the same first name that had married men with the same last names. Different first names, same last name. Okay, so you've got two women here. We're going to call them Sue and, we call them Sue. Well, the two Sues married guys with the same last name, so Jones. So we've got Sue Jones. One got married to John, one got married to Bill. That was the only difference between them. They both got married around the same date. They both had a child around the same date, which they gave the same first and middle names to, and they lived in the same county of New York. I'm like, huh. So when I found the obituary, which I thought was for Sue who married John, I found out that the obituary was actually for Sue who married Bill. But they both, and that's when I found out that they both had children within weeks of each other in the same county that had the same first and middle names. I still don't know if John and Bill are related. I haven't gone back that far to check that. But yeah, it was just, and it was a very unusual first name that they had. We're just using Sue for the example. So I was sort of like, well, that's a very unusual first name. And so it was very interesting to find that one married a Bill, one married a John, and the one I needed to follow was the one that had married the John and had that son. So then I had to create a Excel spreadsheet where I had the records listed down the side that I had looked at and what I had found for each person. And then I had to figure out, well, which one are they talking about in this time frame? One of them was a little easier to manage because they got married to one person and stayed with that person all the way through to when their mother died. And the mothers died around the same age. It was really weird. It's like these two women just mirrored each other throughout their life, about where they live, and they lived within miles of each other. They lived in the same county their entire lives. They had sons with the exact same first, middle, and last names that were born within weeks of each other. And I was trying to think, well, maybe it's the same person and somebody screwed up on them. But nope. When we're looking through the records and everything, they were actually two different individuals, which was really weird. It was the strangest thing I'd come across as far as research goes. But because I had listed down the side, all the records that I checked, the information that I had, then I had to figure out which, what should we call the boy? Which Phil was this one and which Phil was this one. And it was an interesting thing to untangle, because then I had to go back into the tree and remove this particular Phil with Sue Jones married to Bill out of that record, because that was the completely wrong Phil, and I had to put in the new information. Fortunately, I found my error before I had to report back to the client and give them the update on everything. But of course, this story got to be part of it, and now it's one of those ones that just sits in the back of your mind for a while and just percolates, and you're thinking, yeah, maybe I'll go back and have another look. Now I've acquired new skills and new different places I can go and look. Maybe I should go back and have another. And and whenever I work on anybody's tree, whenever I work on anybody's family tree and everything else, I still leave the tree open in my collection of trees on Ancestry. I remember talking to Ancestry one time. They go, "Do you realize you have 42 trees?" I went, "Yeah, that's about right." So I collect the trees, but every now and again something will niggle me, and I'll go back. Oh, I wonder what happened over here. Let me go have another look, and I'll just go in and have another look. And if I find anything of interest, I'll let the client know. Hey, just happened to be playing around. Check this out, and there you go. So this one I do want to go back. This particular one I do want to go back and have another closer look at and find every piece of information I can on these two guys that had a mother with the same name. Their maiden names were different. It was just they married people with the same last name, and find out if the husbands were actually brothers or cousins, to see if there was any, because they were all in the same county in New York. So the likelihood of them meeting or being related to each other, being in the same county, the last name is not a common last name. So it's pretty high that they could be related. But unless we go in and we dig and find out more information about these guys, we're not going to fully know. So that'll be one of my, that's on my project list, to just go back, and I have a project list of things to go back and check every now and again for my clients. So like I've got one that I can't find the father's birth information for. And I think it's something that the client's actually going to have to go and apply to get a copy of, because the online records only go to a certain date in a particular year. It doesn't go to like December 31st of the year. It goes to some month day, and he's like 2 weeks after that date. But we're not sure if his birth was registered at the time he was born, or if it was one that was recorded later when he needed to have a birth certificate for his passport and other records. So it could be something where the client may have to go to the records office, either by letter or call them up or whatever, or email them and everything else to see if she can get a copy of her father's birth certificate. So that's going to be an interesting one, because that is the missing link we have in her puzzle. Is we're pretty sure who the birth mother was. We're not really sure about the birth father, but we have found through the stories that she was told when she was growing up about her dad and his childhood and everything else, we've been able to piece together what we think is her lineage on that side, but we're not 100% sure. And if we could get hold of the birth certificate, that could open up a lot more information. And I just suddenly thought, if we can get his citizenship papers for the country he moved to, then that could also help provide us with more information as well. And yes, there's a few other records we could go and look at and see if they're available, but having that birth certificate would be a huge, huge help. So anyway, when you're looking at somebody's thing, look at all the possible things that could have taken place in their lifetime. What historical events happened during those years? Where did they take place? Was it somewhere close to where they were living? Was it somewhere far away? Were they involved in some way? Was there a war that was on that they may have served in, or they may have a draft card for? What children did they have? What does the birth record show for those children? What is their marriage record? What do the children's marriage records show? What information is available on the death certificate? Even cemetery records. If you go to the cemetery office, you can quite often find out who purchased a plot, when it was purchased, who was in that plot. I know in New Zealand, we went to one, and this is so funny. Went to one, and it's a family plot that was purchased by I think my second great grandmother was purchased by. I think it was her that purchased it. And one of her kids married this guy that she did not like, never liked him. And we discovered that they're all buried together in the same grave. And so that's kind of like one of our little funny family stories, is that, this particular second great grandmother did not like this particular son-in-law, yet their bodies are resting together for eternity in the same plot. Because the tombstone may not show everybody who is inside the plot. So this is where going to the cemetery office and getting a copy of the record for that particular plot to find out who purchased it, when it was purchased, when it's been opened, because they will tell you when it's been opened and who was interred at the time, whether it was a coffin interred or whether it was ashes that were interred. That all information will be there, but it may not have everybody listed on the tombstone. So that's something to keep in mind when you're looking at cemeteries. Oh, they're not there. I can't find them. Go to the cemetery office and ask for information about that particular plot. Explain how you're related to that person. Like I went in and said, hey, my mum went in and says, I'm the great granddaughter of this person. And I'm her daughter, so which makes that's my second great grandmother. And we just want to know what's on the plot records. And so they brought out the card, and on there, and Mum stood there and wrote everything, transcribed everything off the card, because at that time they wouldn't copy them for you. So you actually had to look at the little 3x5 index cards that were in card catalogs with the little hole in the middle with the little, we talked about them the other day. And we copied everything off there, and it had all the dates that the plot was opened to either bury a casket or ashes. And it had the name of the person, the date it was open, the name of the person that went in there, their death information, along with whether they were a coffin or whether it was a burial or ashes that were going in there. And so we found out that there was a whole bunch of people in there, and about 75% of them were listed on the actual tombstone. The other ones were not. So that was kind of interesting. And I was looking for my great-grandparents where they were, and we were told that they were in one of the cemeteries in Thames in New Zealand. So we went there and we're busy looking around, and we found their daughter's grave, which is who we were looking for to start with. But there was just only the mention that the daughter was in there, and she passed when she was like 5, I think it was. But the guy who was the caretaker of the cemetery actually lived across the road. So he went over there. He comes back with this huge, like, think of blueprints. You know how big blueprints are? He comes back with like this blueprint thing and showed us that. And because we had been to the, and showed us where the plot was, which we had actually already found, but we'd been to the county offices beforehand and gotten the printout and found out that my great-grandparents were buried with my great aunt, my great-grand aunt, who passed when she was 5. And so we went up there, but there was no mention at the time of them being in, their ashes being in the plot with her. But years later, somebody added a piece, and I haven't been back to see it, but since that visit, somebody's added a piece that's got Granny and Pop on there. So it's kind of interesting to see what goes on. And this is where some of the stories kind of go, hey, I got the cemetery. Da, 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 da. They're like, oh, that person's in there. And because my mum started laughing when she read that. And I go, what's the matter? And she goes, see this guy here? I said, yes. I said, well, who's he? She goes, well, he was married to this, is it my great-grandmother or one of my great aunts? Married to somebody in the family that was a child of my second great-grandmother. And she goes, yeah, your second great-grandmother, she couldn't stand him. She could not stand him. And I said, now they're buried together. So, yeah, you find out all sorts of cool stuff like that. Great stories and everything else. But anyway, I'm out of here for now. Make up your look at the dates that they were born, what census records were taking place, what electoral rolls could they possibly be on, even school records. Look at their school records. Where did they go to school? I know on Ancestry now is starting to show a lot of yearbooks on there. Their dates are a little, I will warn you, their dates are a little off when it comes to birth years of the person. I've found stuff in there about Brad, and I can tell him by the photograph, but the birth years that they've got listed there are way off in some of them. And I'm like, yeah, you really don't need to go by the birth years. Look at the photograph. If it looks like the person, it probably is. Did they go to that school? But you can find church records, cemetery records, school records, land records, deed records. If they were in business, what business records were available for them? Did they belong to a chamber? Did they belong to a society, an organization, anything like that you can find? Make a list of all the documentations and then go through and say, now, which one would answer my question of, did my second great-grandfather serve in the war, during the war? Was he ever in the military, or did he just get a draft card? And that sort of thing too. But you also want to verify that you do have the right people. One of the things I'm doing right now is going through my mother-in-law's side of the tree, because it goes up to a certain point, and then this branch goes off to the Mayflower, and this branch goes off to the American Revolution. So we're having to verify all the records before we can submit everything. And so that's going to take a little time, because I want to make sure I get all my sources in there, get everything correct. And the American Revolution one's pretty much done. The Mayflower is the brand new one that we're looking at. So anyway, I tell you, there's so much out there and so much to absorb. It's just and answering questions and the puzzles and everything else. It's so much fun. But anyway, have a super fantastic, sparkling rest of your evening, and we will catch you all back here tomorrow evening around 6 p.m. Pacific time. Hey, konera.